Colorado, 1871. A man checks into a frontier hotel with $40 in his pocket and a land deed he has been carrying for 3 weeks. By morning, the deed is gone. Not stolen, not in any way he can prove. Just gone. And the man at the front desk has no memory of seeing it. Welcome to Mystery Wild West. And what you're about to hear is not the version most people know. If this is the kind of history that actually tells you something real, subscribe. We go deeper here than most. Here is a question for the comments. Have you ever stayed somewhere that felt safe on the surface, but left you with the sense that something was off, that the walls knew more than they should? Tell us. Because the Frontier Hotel was exactly that, and the people who built it designed it that way. Most people think a Frontier Hotel was simply a place to sleep. A bed, 4 walls, somewhere to put your boots while you closed your eyes. That image is almost completely wrong. The Frontier Hotel was one of the most sophisticated information-gathering operations in the American West, and the man who ran it knew things about every guest that those guests never intended to share. Think about what a traveler carried when he arrived at a Frontier Hotel. Cash, documents, land deeds, business contracts, letters of introduction, sometimes gold, always information, where he had come from, where he was going, what he was planning to do when he got there, all of it visible, all of it noted. The hotel register alone was worth more than the room fees. Every name, every stated origin, every destination, written down in a book that the owner read every night. A man arriving from San Francisco with a letter of introduction to a mining company was not just a guest, he was a signal. He told the owner that someone back in San Francisco believed this man was worth meeting. That meant capital. That meant plans. That meant opportunity. But here's the problem. The guest had no idea any of this was happening. Nevada, 1868. A man arrives by stagecoach. He is dusty, exhausted, and carrying a leather satchel that he does not let out of his hands. He checks in. The clerk is friendly, efficient, asks the right questions in a pleasant tone. The man goes upstairs. The clerk writes 3 things in a separate ledger that is not the public register: the satchel, the origin, the name of the company printed on the letter visible through the satchel's open flap. By the time the man comes down for dinner, someone is already waiting to meet him. This was not unusual. This was the system. The Frontier Hotel operated as a node in a network of information that connected saloon owners, land speculators, freight operators, and local political figures. The hotel clerk was not just an employee. In many establishments, he was a paid intelligence asset, compensated not only for managing rooms, but for reporting on guests, what they carried, what they said, how long they planned to stay, whether they seemed uncertain or confident, whether they appeared to have money or were running short. That last detail mattered more than almost anything else. A man who arrives with resources and a clear plan is difficult to manipulate. A man who arrives tired, short on funds, and unsure of his next step is vulnerable in ways that the hotel system was specifically designed to exploit. And this is where things change. The pricing structure of a Frontier Hotel was not set by the cost of operating the rooms. It was set by the economic condition of the likely guest. In a town adjacent to a mining operation, the hotel rates rose and fell with the productivity of the nearby claims. When the claims were producing and men had money, prices went up. When production slowed and men were desperate, prices dropped just enough to keep them in the building. because a desperate man staying in your hotel is more useful than a desperate man who has left. A miner who has run out of operating capital checks into a frontier hotel and cannot pay to leave, not because he is locked in, because leaving requires money for transport, money for supplies, money for the next location, none of which he has. The hotel extends credit. It always extends credit. The credit comes with conditions that are never fully explained at the time of extension. The miner works. He pays down the debt slowly. The debt grows in ways he cannot track because the accounting is held by the hotel and he has no copy. He is not a prisoner. He just cannot leave. That situation repeated itself across the frontier with enough regularity that it had an informal name among the men who lived it: being roomed. You were roomed when the hotel had you in a financial position from which departure was practically impossible. The room was not a comfort, it was a mechanism. But it gets worse. Because the debt was not the only tool, the hotel building itself was a surveillance environment in ways that most guests never considered. The walls of a frontier hotel room were thin, in many establishments deliberately thin. The construction that looked solid from the outside was often a single layer of rough timber with gaps between the boards wide enough to hear a conversation clearly from the next room. This was not a failure of frontier construction technique. Frontier builders knew how to make walls. The gaps were a choice. A business negotiation happening in room 4 could be heard from room 3. The man in room 3 worked for the hotel owner. The information moved downstairs by morning. The owner knew the terms of the deal before either party had left the building. And he was in a position to contact a competitor, adjust a land price, or insert himself into the transaction in ways that neither negotiating party could explain. A group of cattle buyers meets in a frontier hotel room in Texas, 1874. They are discussing the price they are willing to pay for a herd currently held by a rancher 2 days' ride away. They settle on a number. They shake hands. They go to sleep. In the morning, a man they have never seen before appears at the rancher's property with an offer that is slightly higher than the number they agreed on. The rancher sells to him. The buyers arrive to find the herd gone. They have no way to explain what happened. They suspect. They cannot prove. The man who made the higher offer was connected to the hotel. The hotel owner took a percentage. The buyers lost the deal and never understood why. Ask yourself this: if every conversation you had in private could be heard by someone working against your interests, how would that change the way you operated? How many decisions would you make differently if you knew the walls were listening? The men on the frontier mostly didn't know, and the ones who did know learned it the hard way. Now let's talk about something that sits underneath all of this and rarely gets discussed: the hotel's relationship to the local law. In a frontier town with a functioning sheriff, the hotel was theoretically subject to legal oversight. In practice, the relationship ran in the other direction. The sheriff needed the hotel, not for personal comfort, for information. The hotel clerk knew who was in town, when they had arrived, and what they were carrying. That was more useful to a frontier lawman than almost any other source. The arrangement that developed in many towns was informal and unspoken. The hotel passed certain information to the sheriff's office: the arrival of wanted men, suspicious behavior, unusual quantities of cash or weapons. In exchange, the sheriff's office looked away from the hotel's less straightforward practices: the credit arrangements, the thin walls, the secondary ledger. This was not corruption in the simple sense. It was a working relationship between two institutions that both benefited from each other's cooperation. The problem was that the hotel owner always benefited more. The sheriff got information. The hotel owner got protection and legitimacy. Those are not equal trades. A man arrives at a frontier hotel in 1876 with a warrant outstanding in another territory. He doesn't know the hotel clerk has a standing arrangement with the local sheriff. He checks in, gives a false name, pays in advance. By the following morning, the sheriff has his real name, his room number, and a physical description provided by the clerk. The arrest is clean and quiet. The sheriff gets credit. The hotel gets the guests' belongings, which are held as collateral against an unpaid bill that was calculated after the arrest. That is not an invented scenario. That is how the system worked in towns where the arrangement was established, and this is where things change again. Because the hotel's power was not only over individual guests, it extended to the town's broader economic life in ways that most accounts of the frontier period completely ignore. Consider the traveling merchant. In the 1860s and 70s, a significant portion of commerce in frontier regions moved on the backs of men who traveled between settlements, carrying goods, taking orders, and extending credit on behalf of larger supply companies based in established cities. These men stayed in hotels every night, in every town they passed through. The hotel owner in each of those towns had a relationship with the traveling merchant that was not simply commercial. He knew the merchant's routes. He knew which settlements the merchant considered viable customers and which he had written off. He knew the credit terms the merchant was offering and how much outstanding debt existed in each community. That information was worth a significant amount to anyone interested in the economic health of the surrounding region. Land speculators, supply company competitors, local businessmen trying to understand whether a neighboring settlement was growing or declining. All of them had reasons to want what the hotel owner knew, and the hotel owner sold it. Not obviously, not through a formal arrangement, through the quiet economy of favors and information that ran underneath the visible commerce of every frontier town. A land speculator wants to know whether a settlement 40 miles east is worth purchasing property in. He doesn't ride out there himself. He has lunch with the hotel owner in the nearest established town. The hotel owner has seen every traveling merchant who has passed through in the last 18 months. He knows which ones stopped at the eastern settlement and which ones skipped it. He knows whether the orders from that settlement have been growing or shrinking. He knows more about the economic trajectory of that settlement than anyone who actually lives there. The speculator pays for the information in a form that doesn't look like payment. A gift, a referral, a quiet stake in the next transaction. The hotel owner adds to a network of obligation that keeps expanding outward in every direction. But here's the problem. Networks of obligation always break somewhere. The frontier hotel system was robust as long as the information it traded remained accurate, and the relationships holding it together remained functional. When either of those conditions failed, the collapse could be fast and unexpected. A hotel owner in a Montana town builds his position over 7 years. He has relationships with 4 traveling merchants, 2 land speculators, the sheriff, and the man who controls the local freight operation. His information network covers a radius of 60 miles. He knows things that no single person in the territory can match. Then the railroad comes through 40 miles to the south. The traveling merchants change their routes. The freight operation shifts its base. 3 of the 4 merchants stop coming through his town entirely. Within 8 months, the information flowing through his hotel has dropped to a fraction of what it was. The relationships built on that information begin to dissolve. The men who owed him favors are no longer in proximity to repay them. The men he owed favors to are no longer in a position to collect. He still owns the building. He still has the rooms. But without the network, the hotel is just a hotel, and a hotel in a town the railroad bypassed is not a profitable operation. By 1882, the building is for sale. That pattern, the rapid rise of a hotel-based information network, followed by equally rapid collapse when the underlying geography shifted, repeated across the frontier wherever the railroad changed the map. And the railroad changed the map constantly. Have you ever watched something that seemed permanent? A business, a community, a way of doing things, collapse faster than anyone expected once one key element shifted? Think about what that felt like, and then imagine it happening to everything around you at once. That was the frontier town when the railroad came through somewhere else. Now let's go back to the room itself. Because the physical experience of sleeping in a frontier hotel deserves more attention than it usually gets, and it tells you something important about what the hotel actually was. The standard frontier hotel room in the 1860s and 70s was small, very small. A bed, a washstand, a hook on the wall. The bed was shared, not with a stranger necessarily, but the assumption that any given bed would hold one person per night was not universal. In cheaper establishments, two men who arrived separately might find themselves assigned the same room if the hotel was full. They were expected to share. This was not considered unusual. It was the norm, and it created a social environment inside the hotel that the owner understood and used. Two strangers sharing a room talk. They have nothing else to do in the dark and the quiet. They talk about where they came from and where they are going. They talk about what they are carrying and what they are planning. By morning, each knows considerably more about the other than either intended to share. And the clerk who assigned them to the same room knew enough about both of them to predict that the conversation would produce useful information. It was not always that calculated. Sometimes it was simply the consequence of limited space. But in the hotels run by men who understood the information value of their operation, the room assignments were not random. Men with complementary vulnerabilities were placed together. A man with money and uncertainty about how to deploy it, sharing a room with a man who had a plan and no capital. A buyer and a potential seller, neither knowing the other existed, introduced by the simple mechanism of a shared bed in a crowded hotel. The owner didn't need to be in the room. He just needed to talk to the clerk in the morning. But it gets worse. Because beyond the information extracted from guests, the Frontier Hotel served a function that almost no account of the period acknowledges directly. It was a mechanism for removing people from the legal record. In a frontier town before formal record keeping was established, a man could arrive, stay, conduct business, and leave without any documentation that proved he had been there. The hotel register was the closest thing to an official record of presence, and the hotel owner controlled the register. A man who needed to not exist on a given date could pay to not exist. His name would not appear in the register. His presence would not be acknowledged. If anyone asked, he had not been there. The clerk had no memory of him. The other guests, carefully selected, had not been placed in a position to observe him. This was not only used by criminals. It was used by businessmen who needed deniability for a negotiation, by politicians who needed distance from a meeting, by men whose marriages or business partnerships would not survive the knowledge of where they had spent a particular week. The hotel sold absence the same way it sold presence. Both had a price. Neither appeared in any ledger that a court could later examine. A businessman from back east arrives at a frontier hotel in 1873. He is there to negotiate the purchase of a water rights claim that his company back home has officially declared no interest in acquiring. The negotiation, if it happens, must not connect to his company's name. He pays the hotel owner before he checks in. He is registered under a different name. The negotiation happens in the back room. The deal is struck. He leaves. 3 months later, his company acquires the water rights through a series of intermediary transactions. No one can place him in the territory on the relevant date. The hotel owner keeps no record. He does keep the payment, and he keeps the knowledge, which is worth more than the payment if he ever needs it. This is the version of the frontier hotel that the popular image, the tired cowboy, the creaking bed, the wash bowl in the corner, was built to obscure. Now let's talk about the women who worked in frontier hotels, because their situation adds another layer to what the hotel actually was. The women who worked as hotel staff, cleaning rooms, doing laundry, working in the kitchen, sometimes managing the front desk in establishments owned by their husbands or fathers, occupied a position of significant structural vulnerability. They were inside the information environment of the hotel at all times. They heard what the thin walls let through. They saw what guests left behind. They knew which rooms were used for which purposes. That knowledge made them useful. It also made them dangerous to the owner, because a woman who talked was a woman who could unravel the careful discretion that made the hotel's secondary operations possible. The management of this problem was handled differently in different establishments. In some hotels, the female staff were family members whose loyalty was assumed and reinforced through economic dependence. In others, they were hired women whose employment terms included an explicit or implicit requirement of silence. In others still, the problem was managed by limiting what any individual woman could see. Her duties were confined to a specific part of the hotel, and she never had full visibility of the operation. But the knowledge accumulated regardless. A woman who cleaned rooms in a frontier hotel for 3 years knew things that no one else in the territory could match. She knew whose luggage contained what. She knew which guests returned and which disappeared. She knew which rooms had been cleaned of things that shouldn't have been there. She knew who had paid extra and for what. That knowledge was almost never spoken aloud. The consequences of speaking it were clear, and they did not require explicit communication. A woman without employment on the frontier had very limited options. The hotel understood this and relied on it. And this is where the full picture of the frontier hotel comes into focus. It was not a place of rest. It was an environment designed to extract maximum value from the people passing through it, their money, their information, their plans, their vulnerabilities, their secrets. The beds were real. The meals were real. The exhausted traveler did sleep, and in the morning he did feel better than he had the night before. The hotel provided something genuine. It always did. That was the point. But underneath the genuine service ran a current of observation, recording, and quiet exploitation that most guests never detected. The ones who did detect it were usually the ones who had been through it before, who had lost something they couldn't explain in a previous hotel in a previous town, and had learned to be careful about what they said in the dark. A man checks into a frontier hotel in 1878. He has been west for 4 years. He pays in advance. He gives a name that is real, but not the name on his documents. He keeps his satchel under the mattress. He does not discuss his plans with the clerk. He eats quickly and goes upstairs early. In the morning, He leaves before the hotel is fully awake. He has not been robbed. He has not been manipulated. He has lost nothing. He has also learned nothing, made no contacts, opened no doors, and made no progress toward whatever brought him west in the first place, because the hotel's information network was a two-way system. If you refused to participate in it as a source, you also lost access to it as a resource. The man who protected himself completely ended up isolated. The man who opened himself up ended up exploited. There was no clean path through the Frontier Hotel. There was only the question of which cost you were willing to pay. That question had no good answer. It still doesn't, in the places where the same logic applies today. Any environment where the price of connection is exposure and the price of protection is isolation. The Frontier Hotel was the first version of something that never really went away. Now let's talk about food. Because the hotel dining room was another layer of the same system, and it worked in ways that most travelers never considered. The Frontier Hotel dining room was frequently the only place in a new settlement where a man could sit down to a prepared meal. Not the best meal, not a comfortable meal, but a meal with a table and a chair and other people around him. That mattered. After weeks on the trail or months in a mining camp, the simple act of sitting at a table with other men felt like civilization. The hotel knew this. The hotel priced it accordingly. A plate of beans and salt pork in a Frontier Hotel dining room cost 3 to 4 times what the same ingredients were worth at the general store. The markup was not hidden. It was simply never questioned, because the men paying it were not in a position to cook for themselves and had no alternative. The hotel had the kitchen. The hotel had the cook. The hotel set the price. But the dining room served a purpose beyond feeding people. It was the most reliable gathering point in the hotel, more reliable even than the front desk. Every man staying in the building passed through the dining room at least once a day, which meant the dining room was where the hotel's information network was most active. The cook knew things. The woman serving the table knew things. The man refilling the coffee knew things. All of them reported in one form or another to the owner, not through formal instruction, through the simple understanding that their employment depended on being useful, and being useful meant paying attention. A man eating alone at a corner table in 1872 is more revealing than he understands. The way he holds his fork tells you whether he grew up with money. The condition of his boots tells you how long he has been traveling. The newspaper he is reading, if he has one, tells you where he came from and how recently. The questions he asks the server tell you what he is looking for. All of it is information. All of it flows upward. And this is where things change, because the dining room was also where deals were made that were never supposed to be deals. A man sitting alone is approachable. A man who has just eaten is relaxed. A man who is relaxed is more likely to talk freely, to agree to things he might reconsider on a full night's sleep, to share plans he intended to keep private. The timing of an approach, after dinner, with coffee on the table, and the room quieting down, was not accidental. It was strategy. The man who sat down next to a tired traveler in a Frontier Hotel dining room was not always there by chance. Sometimes he was. But in the hotels where the owner understood his operation, the seating in the dining room was as managed as the room assignments upstairs. The right men were placed near each other. The conversation that followed was observed. What came out of it benefited the owner, whether or not either party realized a negotiation had taken place. But it gets worse. Let's talk about what happened to a man's belongings while he slept. because the Frontier hotel room offered almost no security for personal property, and this was not an oversight. A man arriving at a Frontier hotel in the 1870s had no safe, no lockbox, no secure storage of any kind beyond what he could fit under his body while he slept. His luggage sat in the room. His coat hung on the hook. His boots sat on the floor. His documents, if he was careful, went under the mattress. If he was less careful, they sat in plain view on the washstand. The room was cleaned every morning, usually by a single person. That person had access to everything in the room for as long as it took to make the bed and empty the wash basin. In a well-run hotel, that was 8 to 10 minutes. 8 to 10 minutes was enough time to read a letter, to note the details on a document, to check the contents of an unlocked bag. Nothing needed to be taken. That was the sophistication of it. Taking something left evidence. Reading something left nothing. A man whose letter had been read had no way to prove it. A man whose documents had been noted had no recourse. The information left the room with the person who cleaned it, and by the time the guest came down for breakfast, it was already somewhere else. A cattle rancher checks into a Frontier hotel in Wyoming, 1875. He is carrying a letter of agreement, not yet signed, from a buyer interested in purchasing a portion of his herd at a fixed price. The agreement is conditional on a survey of the herd being completed within 30 days. He leaves the letter on the washstand while he goes to dinner. In the morning, it is exactly where he left it. Nothing is disturbed. Nothing is missing. 2 weeks later, a competitor approaches the same buyer with a lower price and specific knowledge of the survey timeline. The buyer accepts the lower offer. The rancher loses the deal. He spends months trying to understand how the competitor knew the details of a private agreement. He never figures it out. The hotel room told him nothing. It never did. Now consider what all of this meant for the men who arrived at a Frontier hotel already in a weakened position. Not the speculators or the merchants or the cattle buyers, but the ordinary men, the ones who had come west with a small amount of money and a large amount of hope and very little understanding of how the environment they were entering actually worked. These men were the most exposed. They were the ones the hotel system was most efficiently designed to process. They arrived with enough to be worth extracting from and not enough to protect themselves from the extraction. A man arrives in Colorado in 1869. He has saved for 3 years to make the trip. He has $80, a strong back, and the belief, reinforced by everything he has read and been told, that the West is a place where a man who works hard can build something. He checks into the cheapest room in the Frontier Hotel because it is the only accommodation available. He puts his money in his boot. He lies down on the bed. He does not know that the room rate will increase by the end of the week, citing a shortage of available accommodation that does not exist. He does not know that the meal prices will rise the following morning when the cook learns he has no other options. He does not know that the man who approaches him in the dining room on the second day, friendly and full of helpful advice about available claims in the area, is connected to a land operation that specializes in selling worked-out claims to new arrivals who don't know what a worked-out claim looks like. By the end of 2 weeks, he has spent $40 of his $80 and acquired a claim that will produce nothing. He is not a fool. He is simply a man who entered a system without understanding its rules in a place where no one was going to explain them to him. That was the Frontier Hotel at its most complete, not a place of rest, a machine. Efficient, quiet, and almost entirely invisible to the people running through it. Here is the final question before we close. When you think about the places you have passed through, the institutions that offered you something you needed, that seemed organized around your comfort and your rest, how much did you actually know about what was happening around you while you slept? The men who understood this, the ones who had been burned once and learned, moved through frontier hotels differently. They said less, they observed more. They paid attention to who sat near them, who refilled their coffee without being asked, who smiled a little too readily at the front desk. They developed a specific kind of wariness that had no name but was immediately recognizable to anyone who shared it. A quietness, a habit of watching the room before entering it, a tendency to keep their backs to the wall. Those men were not paranoid. They were educated. The Frontier Hotel had taught them something that no school ever would. The traveler on the frontier slept in a building that was watching him. The register recorded his name. The walls recorded his words. The clerk recorded his luggage. The owner recorded everything the clerk told him. And in the morning, when the traveler came downstairs and paid his bill and walked out into the street, he felt like a free man moving through an open world. He was not wrong. He was also not right. The frontier was a place of genuine freedom and genuine extraction operating simultaneously, using the same buildings, the same transactions, the same cups of coffee in the morning, and the same lanterns at night. The hotel was the place where both of those things happened most quietly and most completely. The bed was real. The rest was not. That's Mystery Wild West. And we'll see you in the next one.